I seem to understand intuitively that if I went into any of these, I would be there for only a few moments or minutes at most, and then I would have to come out and face the wheel again almost immediately. I didn't want to do this, but there seemed to be an odd kind of knowing associated with that. The wheel didn't seem bothered one way or another. It didn't seem to matter to it whether I emerged again in 3 minutes' time or 3 decades' time. All it cared about was sorting me. And there was a kind of ruthlessness to this that I will not soon forget. I found myself back on the highway in what seemed to be a very short distance back up the road, still approaching the intersection. This is just one of the many mysteries associated with the event that I cannot explain. Did I choose a world which was a version of our universe in which the accident hadn't quite happened yet, but it was just seconds away from happening? I can't say because I have no memory of making that decision. I just remember the look on that driver's face as clearly as if it were yesterday. I remember him bracing back on the wheel, but I braked as I reached the intersection, and that driver or his car were simply nowhere to be seen. So this story has a few like it and a few comments underneath the ones that are like it. So another similar story starts off like this, quote, "I'm curious if anybody has had a near-death experience where they experienced the wheel," he puts in quotation marks, or she, I don't know who it is. "Whatever the thing was, I perceived it as an impossibly huge wheel on its side. Its paddles seemed to slosh energy, and each paddle represented a possible timeline where I could be resorted. It was aware but non-human, mechanical, determined, and possibly powerful, like a core engine of our reality. It's my belief that I died in a car accident in 2013. This is a different person in August of 2013. While I was no longer incarnate, I was in limbo, and the wheel approached, continually spinning. It would pull me, in parentheses, unwillingly, but I didn't fight it because I knew it was useless to struggle, into a timeline. I would be rebuilt physically, psychically, and then if something didn't feel right about the timeline, my being would instantly crumble, and I'd see the wheel spinning again until I was sucked back into another timeline. Felt like pages of a book being flipped frantically. This repeated an unknown number of times until I finally fit a timeline. At this point, things blacked out, and I didn't have a conscious thought until I woke up, sharply inhaling in my car, not mangled by the vehicle, which had originally slammed directly into my car door. It had now slammed into my front driver's side wheel, and the axle and frame of the car took the brunt of the hit. I'm surprised I remember the sorting wheel. In my research, others have experienced it or something similar. Maybe I experienced it at my core. I refuse to reincarnate again without good reason. I also refuse to let the powers at be do the white light tunnel meeting dead loved ones thing. I don't want to be tricked into mindlessly doing this incarnation thing again. Could be I experienced the wheel because I refused traditional experiences. Anyway, anyone experience an NDE? Anyone ever see the sorting wheel? Question mark. So this other one, I didn't even go through those comments yet, but there's another one that kind of talked about getting sick. And this is what he said, quote, "I said, I don't feel so good," and collapsed right there. I was passed out, but I also saw this large wheel that reminded me of an old movie film reel. It was floating in space, blue, sparkled background with bits of white and silver everywhere. I could feel myself being pulled to one of the images on the reel when suddenly I was in that image. I was walking down a street, looking out into a amber horizon on a sidewalk. After about 10 seconds, I knew something wasn't right and tried to pull myself out of it, as though I was waking from a dream. I saw streaks of static across my vision and clicked into the next reel, another life of mine, but it wasn't right. One reel click after the other from 10 seconds to 7, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then rapid fire. And I screamed in this world and in my natural one. Me lying there passed out on the floor screaming, trying to get back to reality. Eventually, I found the correct real image and woke up. Here's another one. This is going to sound bizarre, but I had a nightmare a few months after an NDE, near-death experience, when I was about 11 or 12. Don't know if this lines up, but your story unearthed the memory. So here we go. Sum it up attempt. A solid iron rod, like 2 inches thick, struck me in the face, dropping me where I stood. My sister said I was lying there not breathing for what she said felt like an eternity, but couldn't have been more than a minute. Suddenly, she said I sprang up screaming, scaring her half to death, ran into the house. Most I remember was looking up before the pipe hit, and then being in the car on the way to the hospital. The dream, from what I can remember, I'm 31 now, I was in a void save for a spinning wheel or ladder that I was hanging on to by the sides. I couldn't see the whole thing I was hanging on, but inside the openings of the wheel ladder thing, he puts like wheel slash ladder were different places slash times. I didn't think much of it while I was desperately, I think he means like hanging from one reality window to the next. The word he uses is clambering. I don't know. I guess he was like hanging on to the reality window. He was like hanging on from one to the next, seemingly looking for my home, he says. My reality. Climbing up, down, left, right had little meaning in that place. Whatever the ladder was, it was spinning. And there was an understanding that I was clinging to it outside of time. That's interesting. Now I think of it, this is around the same time I started wondering in the back of my mind that I had slipped into a different reality, that everything felt off just slightly, and only certain things would be obvious to me as being wrong from what I had previously known. For example, Pisces astrological sign, from what I remembered before, as was used for Cancer and vice versa. This isn't something I've messed up. We had a giant astrology book as kids, and I would always be flipping through it. Doctor said, very lucky it wasn't more serious, that I didn't have a concussion, just a severe headache and 16 stitches in my face. I was told while being sewn up that if the pipe had struck higher, I'd definitely be dead. That I wasn't in a coma at least was miraculous. I've tried asking my parents about it and other high strange experiences, but they usually just laugh it off. So a point I wanted to get back to was the idea of time being something you can't exactly nail down to anything. And so this is a comment that I wrote. It says, I just listened to Matt at Quantum of Conscious say in the 1960s, Olympics recorded time down to a tenth of a second. For example, like 9.2. Then later in the 80s, they added it down to the 100th, the 9.25. Now they can record things down to the thousandth of a second, 9.259 or something like that, so he uses that as an example that we never get to anything that we can hold down to a moment. And to us, that implies that time itself is kind of like a farce or a fake idea, at least as anything substantial that we can like hold in our hand or put into use or control it. Now, the second idea that I kind of noticed was that there's no such thing as a clock that actually gives you a measurement of real, what you would call time. Every clock can be changed by the energy going in and out of it, or a quartz wiggling back and forth or something. Like there's never anything that actually measures time, right? The idea for this came when I saw a news article. I looked for it again, and I don't know how it ended up impossible to find things on the internet after like 2016, but I remember hearing the story of there was one day somewhere around 2012 or so that a bunch of people in Italy showed up to work, I don't know, like a half hour, 15 minutes early or something. And the explanation for this, because it was people that like they didn't know each other, they didn't necessarily all work at the same place, but dozens and dozens of people, or maybe even hundreds of people, all in one day just showed up to work early. They showed up to work the same amount early. The explanation for this was at some point in the electrical fields of their wall sockets, either the voltage or the amperage was up a small percentage, and that made their clocks run quicker. But this was in the time of cell phones, so that I don't know, maybe there were people that didn't look at their cell phones much or something. That made me think like the volts or the amperage increasing makes the clock run faster. So it doesn't make time go faster, it just makes the illusion of the clock reading time go faster. So what are clocks really measuring? Clocks are really measuring the amount of energy that's escaping from a battery or escaping from the wall socket, or is getting updated nowadays from the grand server in the sky that they claim is running off an atomic clock. Well, atomic clock doesn't do anything different than any other clock. It just has like a self-correction with quartz. It's just quartz. It just measures quartz wiggling back and forth. Some kind of cesium atom or something like corrects it when it detects if the quartz loses energy. So there's nothing that you can point to that's like, this clock is actually measuring time. What a clock is really doing, like the clock on your wall is measuring energy escaping from a battery. If the battery starts weakening that energy coming out, the clock's going to run slower. If you boost that battery to where it's like really kicking, that clock is going to run fast. Even a sundial is just measuring light and shadow. It's not measuring actual real time. There's nothing you can like grab and hold in your hand that you can call time. So yeah, there's nothing we can actually point to that there's no such thing as a clock that actually measures real time. Weird, right? And to think that what that guy called some grand engine of reality that seems to be able to move people in and out of not just different time, but it seemed like different dimensions, using what they claim to appear to be water. Really interesting, right? So I'd like to thank everybody for checking out the podcast. My Patreon is patreon.com/ParadoxWalk. Any crazy stories you have, I'd love to hear glitch in a matrix type things or anything supernatural, even really, really out of the ordinary dreams or anything, or cryptids, UFOs, all kinds of stuff. I'll check out any stories at ParadoxWalk podcast at protonmail.com. I'd like to thank my first Patreon, Roxy. The music is Downbeat 88. The opening track is called The Dark. The final track for the credits and stuff is called Moment of Peace. And my RSS feed is in the descriptions at redcircle.com, and I'm also on Spotify, Amazon, Stitcher, BitChute, and YouTube. Have a good day. Thanks for checking it out. Bye.